Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Yeah, no, so Ryan and I met at a dinner in Miami a month or so ago. A dinner from the Hampton Group, which is an awesome community as well. And got to talk to Ryan for a period of time and thought he was super interesting. I'm sure a lot of you know him as well already too. So yeah, Ryan, if you want to give the listeners some of your background too and kind of what you're working on today as well.
Um, my name's Ryan Blair. I'm a father, recently married, and I've been an entrepreneur now for 27 years. And I've been involved in a number of different startups, built and scaled them, sold a few, bought a few, had a few fail, done a lot of transactions, and something like a billion in exits and a couple billion in sales.
So walk us through what that's like, right? I think a lot of people hear these crazy numbers and they see people who have these meaningful exits and like what actually goes into getting a business ready for exit, what goes into actually what happens to the exit, and then how does your life really shift after, right? Kind of like what happens next.
I get that question a lot. A lot of entrepreneurs come to me and ask for help with exits. So I get that a lot. First of all, you have to have a company that someone wants to buy, right? There has to be a company that someone, and if you want to get a big exit, you need to have a company that a very smart person with a whole lot of money wants to buy. Um, I have entrepreneurs come to me and they say, I have a $20 million company and I want to get 100 million on an exit. And I go, no one worth that's got $100 million is going to buy this company, right? It's a mess. It's chaotic. If you've accumulated $100 million, you've done something right and you've surrounded yourself with good people and you have a high level of standards. Rarely are you going to buy a company that's a mess. So in order for you to exit, you have to have your financial house in order. You have to have your legal house in order. You have to run a clean business, and then you have to have something that has a great story to it, that has a growth potential, and the acquiring company needs to see that potential and need that potential if they're going to pay a premium for it, and whatever their goals are need to be met by way of this acquisition. And then there's other nuances like consolidated savings and some of the other reasons why companies pull the trigger on exits. But you have to have something that somebody that's very smart with a lot of money wants to buy, basically.
So walk us through that on your end, right? The most interesting exit or kind of the cleanest exit that you had from a company you were owner of, heavily involved in, like what separated that exit from other ones you may have been involved in as well?
Um, they're always really hard. They're very hard on the entrepreneur. Many entrepreneurs start having self-sabotaging tendencies during the exits. They make mistakes. They take counsel from the wrong advisors, attorneys, investment bankers. They drive the acquiring party away. Sometimes the acquiring party isn't serious. They just want to learn as much as they possibly can about the entrepreneur and even string them along and try to drive down the price by stringing them out. And so your counterparty is very sophisticated, very intelligent, and they're trying to optimize for their shareholders. Oftentimes that makes it very difficult. So the big transactions, $100 million plus, rarely come easily. They're rarely something where someone writes a check and closes, over the weekend. Generally,
Sure.
it's a 6 month process, if not longer. It's painful. It's filled with a lot of fear, and oftentimes I'm counseling entrepreneurs through the process. I'm advising them. I'm helping them negotiate, and then after they sell, they have what I like to call post-exit syndrome, which often is a whole other set of emotional and psychological conditions that occur after you've sold, which a lot of people don't talk about. But it's a real situation after you've sold your company. Oftentimes, you realize that the whole dream of the exit isn't as exciting as you thought it would be.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of those people, at least how I would kind of look at it after looking in, they're people who have built that company for like the years, if not decades, in terms of growing something that was their own, right? And they have so much of their self worth and representation tied to the company itself, right? As the founder, as the owner. And now you have to go figure out what you do, what your purpose is. Luckily, or hopefully, you have a lot of money to go figure it out. But kind of what have you seen from founders or owners that have a meaningful exit and then transition into like the next step of life as well? Like what have they done differently to go find out who they are, what they're meant to go do, and how they find fulfillment, now that they have likely the financial piece of their life solved?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances, and I went, I went through the same crisis after exit as well. So I've done it a few times. One, you're selling your baby. This is your baby. You've created this thing. You have an identity there. You have relationships with your team members, your vendors, your customers. You're a powerful person in this pond that you've created, and you've now sold that. And immediately, the people that once called you every day no longer call you. The employees that cared about how you were doing and sent you notes about happy birthday, this, that, and the other, they've moved on. They have new bosses now. They have new responsibilities. All these people move on in a moment's notice, and you are still holding on, and they've moved on. So that's one difficulty. The other difficulty is you'd be surprised. The more money that you have, the more conflicted you are. As an entrepreneur, having a lot of money is not a good thing. It actually makes you very risk adverse, and you start to protect and worry about risk and worry about what you have to lose as opposed to what you have to gain. And oftentimes, you start getting focused on preserving your wealth. And your new job is to worship your money and try to advance your money. And now you're actually not working to build something and create something. You're working, for money, and that's different than what you started out working for. You started out to build something and to make something and create something and provide a solution or a service or a product and innovate. And now all of a sudden, you're spending all of your time looking at your bank account and worrying about your trades and worrying about your real estate values and how your tenants are performing and all of this other nonsense. Your God literally becomes money, where before it was to create and to better the world and to bring something, invent something, and then pretty soon all you care about is your money. And so that becomes very challenging and depressing. And a lot of times entrepreneurs, they find that they actually go into more scarcity when they have a ton of cash than they did when they had no cash. And you'd be surprised. I helped one young entrepreneur sell his company for nearly 100 million in cash. And he went into a season of scarcity for nearly 2 years, where he literally wouldn't buy the most expensive items on the menu because in his mind, he didn't have a company. He didn't have a job, even though he had, 10% interest on his,
Sure.
tens of millions of dollars in cash coming in, and he had passive income. In his mind, he couldn't afford to buy the most expensive thing in the menu. It was kind of interesting.
So with someone like that, right, what do you do to work with them to go get them to a place of, because if you modeled out, right, if you have $50 million in cash, you're making 10% on that, making
Yeah.
$5 million a year, say you're paying 40% in tax, you're still taking home $250 a month in terms of spend,
Oh yeah.
right? So when you look at going out to eat, you can afford whatever you want on that menu.
Yeah.
So that's more of like a mental block I feel like people get when they look at it, okay, my income may go down for a period of time. I'm not building equity in something. I'm more so have this pot to go work with. It's a meaningful pot and I have interest coming in, but that mental block can be there, right? So like, what'd you do to work with them to get clarity and reality to what goes on?
Well, every one of us has these energies within us that are dormant. Scarcity, for example. And when you're an entrepreneur and your back's against the wall, you're pushing, you're innovating, you're taking risk, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of money and you get comfortable, and then you get to meet the teacher of scarcity in a different way, right? So it's just basically a teacher that you have called in to educate you. And once you turn toward that teacher and you really start to understand the nature of that teacher and you view it as a curriculum, you can pass through it very quickly. Scarcity, anxiety, fear, greed, ego, anxiety, all these things that we face. We face them at different levels, at different times, at different seasons, and we call them in to teach us. And suffering is one of the greatest teachers that we can call in. So I think once we just humanize it and we look at what's happening and we see it as a challenge and we see it as a lesson, then we take the steps to work through the mental or physical blocks around that. And sometimes that might mean that we have to heal our perception on something. It might mean that we have to go to the roots and understand where this perception came to be, or where this thought came to be, and pull it out at the roots, so to speak, by doing various healing practices. And then most important is in every season we have an input and an output ratio. When you're an entrepreneur and you're building, you're in output, you're in constant action. And then you've sold your company and you don't have that output. You're not, you're not doing action every day, talking to people, fighting fires, dealing with, crisis every day. And so then you have to shift to a season of input, and you have to learn how to balance and find the harmony between your input ratio and your output ratio. Now, input might look like meditation, prayer, giving back to charity, doing a garden, building a house, like that's input stuff that you're doing versus output stuff. So finding that harmony between your input ratio and your output ratio is something that each of us have to do, even when we're actively building businesses.
Yeah, and that's a whole different shift too, right? When you look at the person who is just so dialed in, right? I look at I kind of think of the busy founder who's taking 15 calls a day, their calendar's booked back to back, they've got blocks to go be creative, but it's all creative to go build a product, build a service, build a company, build the right team in place. And then you have to go take a step back and kind of do that for your life as well.
Yeah.
Where I feel like you may see it as well too, right? That founder who is in total startup grind mode or build mode, where they're putting all of their effort into building their company, and they have to go do that for themselves after. And that's a huge, huge, huge shift with their
Yeah.
identity and kind of how they focus.
Yeah, it is. We have two games that we need to learn how to master: the external game, which is business, and whatever we're doing in the external side, and then the internal. And most entrepreneurs are totally externally focused. We all gravitate toward the external game. It's fun, it's exciting, it validates us, it gratifies us, it expands us, it teaches us, it pushes us, it shapes us, it molds us, right? There's nothing wrong with being external focused, but you get to a place once you've played that game for long enough that then you start to question the internal game. And these are the big questions, like, why do I exist? Who am I really? Who am I without my company? Who am I without my money? Do my friends really love me for who I am, or do they love me because I have some status or some capital or some ability to provide good times for them? And these questions emerge after you've gotten to a high degree of mastery in the external game. Rarely are you asking these questions before, as an entrepreneur, before you've gotten some mastery on the external.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't get there as well. But if you look at most
Oh, yeah.
people, you're in survival mode, right? Most people aren't going out and selling a company for 9 figures and have the problem of making $5 million a year of interest. They're people who are, working day to day life, right? And they're trying to go figure that out. So for like, think of that founder who has that meaningful exit. They go start searching. They go figure out more of who they are as a person. Like, what do you typically see next, right? The people who nail it, right? I'm sure you work with people who have and who haven't nailed it. The ones who you come in who are kind of somewhat searching for something,
Yeah.
right? They go then kind of dive deep, nail the internal piece, at least get clarity and purpose, and then what do you see a lot of them do next, right? Do you see a lot of them still go build, or a lot of them go, break off and kind of have a more peaceful type of life after?
It is hard to summons that energy that you once had, to build. And it's rare that a person that gets to a pretty high level after an exit is going to want to go back through startup mode. Starting a company is very hard. Doesn't matter how much skill you've acquired, how much capital you have. It is very hard. I've been building one now for 5 years. After I sold my company, I had my own jet. I had, offices all around the world, massive monthly expense account, 580 full-time employees I could call upon. If I had an idea, I could get it done in seconds, right? Just pull a team together. And then all of a sudden I'm starting a new company and I don't have the executive team. I don't have the jet. I don't have the assistants. I don't have, the ability to execute on ideas momentarily. And I don't want to go spend millions of dollars and waste millions of dollars doing that because I once was a startup entrepreneur. So I had to go back and go back to zero and relearn some of the skills that I had acquired. I remember when I started AlterCall, I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm back to where I was in my 20s when I was building in my early 20s. I'm starting from scratch. Even though I was starting from a better place, that was actually a hindrance. I was starting from a beautiful home in the Hollywood Hills. That was a hindrance from when I started in a small 1-bedroom apartment. That was a much more magical situation than me
For sure.
having all of the other luxuries that I had, and then starting a business. Um, and then most entrepreneurs that I know that have exited, I know a few of them, they don't really have the determination and the wherewithal and the staying power to fail over and over again once they've gotten to some high level of success. They tend not to be willing to endure failure because they're just not accustomed to it anymore.
So on that topic, this is actually a conversation I had. A friend of mine's visiting town. We got dinner last night. It's a conversation I've had with a handful of friends who, all in my eyes, will do pretty well financially longer term. And it's that same topic where you can come from a place of scarcity where you have to go survive and you have to
Yeah.
go build to get to a place of where you want to live. And you think about it from the place of having children, right? Where if you're an affluent person and you've done well for yourself and you have the resources, how do you go create that urgency that startup founder living in a studio apartment, right, fighting for their life expenses, struggling for payroll, looking to go grow? How do you create that urgency in children, right, to go take the resources you may have to go help support them versus relying on those resources to go live how they want to live and taking it for granted?
Yeah, that is nearly impossible. It is, there's the rare exceptions to this, but particularly if you're in a situation like mine where I was raised very poor, I want to provide everything I can for my son, right? I don't want to withhold anything. I want to give him everything. I have to restrict myself in my
Sure.
desire to give to him. He had, as a maid that comes 4 days a week, he's got a different life than I had. So he has a different curriculum than I had. I'm not going to be able to infuse that into him. He has to come to that determination on his own. And and for those of us who have had first generation wealth, it's rare that the second generation is really going to have the same type of energy that the first generation did. It is very rare uh, because the second generation, they have a whole different set of variables and curriculum than what the first generation had. So I think that the first generation has to accept the second generation uh, and and then find things that are going to stimulate them, and hopefully they advance the wealth. And if they don't advance the wealth, then that was their life's journey, right? I'm not too caught up in that. My spiritual beliefs are pretty simple. Everyone has a curriculum that they're here, and if my son's curriculum is to conquer procrastination and laziness and understand what it's like to have wealth, and my curriculum was what my curriculum was to create the wealth, then we each have our own curriculum.
Yeah, no, that was one of the more honest answers I've actually heard, which is awesome because it's tough to go recreate that just need, right? I think a lot of things come from the you have to go figure it out to go for survival, right? You have to go figure this out if you're a business owner who's starting out and going to go grow. And if you're coming from a low income type family or home and you don't have that backing and support, you have to go figure it out yourself as to how to go get things done and how to go survive. And
Yeah.
it's always like an interesting topic to go see, how parents think about it who have made it to a certain level of status as to how they view that like that side of the house.
Yeah, he has his curriculum and I have my curriculum, and I don't want to confuse mine with his. And I do make that mistake all the time. I love martial arts and boxing, and he loves video games. And I insist that he does martial arts and boxing, and I insist that he does it 3 days a week. And he goes, "Dad, that's what you love to do, not what I love to do." And so I make mistakes in this particular department because I think it's what's best for him, and we all make mistakes as parents. But each of us has our own curriculum, and each of us has our own series of lessons, and we're all going to suffer. And the types of lessons that he's going to call in are going to be different than the ones that I called in. And it doesn't mean that I'm any better. Society judges me as being more valuable because I achieve more and I create more and I have more economic impact than a person who doesn't create and achieve as much. But the underachiever has it 10 times as hard as the overachiever. And they both have their own series of dilemmas that they have to sort through. And I know many overachievers that are miserable. And being an overachiever comes with its own curriculum and its own suffering. It's just that society values the overachiever more. But I wouldn't wish upon anyone my risk appetite or my desire to create or my willingness to endure hardship in order to be successful, right? That isn't natural for most people. and that shouldn't be. That's not everybody's role in society.
So with that in mind too, I want to dig into, I know you work with a lot of founders who are growing their businesses, looking to sell their companies. And I want to walk through certain like psychological traits that you see in those people. Like I'm a big
Yeah,
psychology geek. I love that kind of stuff.
me too.
And when you look at like the really successful, you kind of think about it, right? If you're investing your time, you're kind of betting on that person to go have a level of success, right? Like what do you look for in that founder is someone you're like, I would bet heavily on this person that they go succeed. Or I see this person, I'm like, hey, they can go, they're good, but they're not that good, right? How do you go
Yeah.
really decide who's worth the time to go invest into? And if you had to go pick them from like an allocation standpoint, how do you go kind of look at different founders as well?
Yeah, there's for me, I've evolved this because I had a small venture capital fund that I invested into a number of companies, and I would give my cash and I'd give advice, and oftentimes they'd take my cash but not my advice, and I'd be very upset about that because as an operator, I fashion myself and I see myself as an operator. Um, so what I look for now, and I've refined this, is one: is this a person that I trust? Do I trust this person? Would I want to go camping with them? Would I want to spend time with them? Would I want to have them over to my house for a week where we brainstorm and we work together? And that's a trust, and that's an alignment in character and an alignment in values, and it's also a product of a shared sense of humor. Is this a person that I would do life with, right? And so I look for the character attributes, and then on the skill side and on the competency side, intelligence is very important because they're going to have to problem solve and figure out how to solve problems. I look for the character traits around resilience. How resilient are they? How willing are they to solve this problem and continue to iterate on it? Um, and then if they're too clever, if they have too many related party things going on, and they have 5 different companies or they're doing 4 different things, that's a red flag to me. I'm looking for somebody who's all in on one thing, and they're going to get that one thing done, and they're going to die trying. Oftentimes people will come to me and they're very smart and they're brilliant, and they'll talk about the 5 different things that they want to do, and I'm not going to participate in that because I can't do 5 things, and it's a shortcoming on mine. And I've even had some cite Elon Musk, and I'm like, you're not Elon Musk. You're not in a situation like he is.
Sure.
So I look for founders that are all in on one concept. They're highly intelligent. They're gonna iterate and innovate and figure it out over the long term. They have a lot of energy, and that I trust, and that I know that through they're going to take my advice and they're going to execute on it. And I've helped a number of founders scale to hundreds of millions of dollars just very recently, and I've witnessed it work when it's magical, and then I've witnessed it when I give the founder money and my time, and they can't execute. So that's the other thing is I really look for execution proficiency. And for example, I had a founder get on the phone with me the other day, and he was talking about one of his team members, and I said, you got to let that team member go. And he literally adjourned the call, got the person on the phone and let that person go, and then called me back and said, it's done. And it was a turnaround of less than an hour. Another founder might spend a month on that, 2 months on that, 3 months, 6 months. They can't let the person go. But I shared with the founder why I thought this person needed to go. They agreed with the logic and the conclusion that I had come to, and they executed within an hour. So I look for speed of execution as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge thing too, is like just getting things done. There's a massive value in that in terms of like time kills all productivity.
Yeah,
Just taking action solves so many different things.
yeah,
So I want to dive into a different topic a little bit as well. A lot of listeners of the show are people who are in corporate type roles, right? They may be in a leadership role in a
mhm,
company, they may be a high earning seller, right? They may be kind of an up and coming person in tech. And for them, a lot of people listening want to go eventually break out and start their own company of some kind. And I feel like on your end, with the coaching and work you've done too, you've seen people who are great fits for entrepreneurship. You've probably seen people who are great fits for general type roles in corporations,
yeah.
right? What traits do you typically see in terms of characteristics of someone who you're talking to them, right? Kind of thing, a young up and coming person, and you're like, you should go do your own thing 100%. Or saying, hey, probably you're best where you're at in terms of the structure or the role itself, whatever that may be. What kind of characteristics do you see on each side?
So everyone can be an entrepreneur. It's a recipe that you have to you have to learn the recipe, and it's a individualized recipe for each of us. Each of us has to figure out our unique recipe to be successful as an entrepreneur. And that's a lot of variables and a lot of iteration. So how much risk am I willing to take is one component of it. How innovative I am, how creative I am, how good am I at recruiting other people, how good am I at casting vision, how good am I at the financials, at breaking down operations, figuring out process, structure, strategy. Like there's a lot to the recipe of being successful as an entrepreneur. And anyone, I believe, can figure out that recipe if they're willing to deprogram some of the things that are hindrances to that recipe, and then go deep into acquiring certain traits and attributes and developing those. Like, if it requires you to be able to recruit people and you're introverted, well, you might have to develop a little more extroverted traits in you, right? So it's knowing yourself and knowing where you're at and knowing the recipe that you're going to basically create for your for your company that you're creating and your entrepreneurial dream, so to speak. Now, if a person is not ready to create that recipe and do the hard work and develop the traits and go through the trial and error, then they're best suited to do it with someone else and do it as a co-founder or a partner or an executive within it. And then some people, they want to play a larger game. So I meet entrepreneurs all the time that they want to work in an existing environment because they can affect change at a different scale in an existing environment. Perhaps their skill set is more applicable to that larger environment versus going into a startup environment where their skill set might not be put to use. So it really just depends on the skill set that you're seeking to apply in the environment. And if you're at a startup with 5 people and you're used to leading a team of 500, you might not like what it's like to lead a team of 5 people. If you're more of a manager versus a doer, you're not going to like a startup because you want to manage people as opposed to do, and you have to be a doer in an early startup phase as opposed to a manager, for example. So it's a recipe that each of us has to figure out. It's unique to our individual ego and character traits and our upbringing and our parenting and our culture and our society. And we have to dial in that recipe in order to be successful. So in general, I can assess a person pretty quickly as to whether or not they have the character traits and the wherewithal to develop the character traits to be successful as an entrepreneur. And then it's just a matter of style. What environment is going to stylistically bring you out and activate you and light you up and give you life? Certain environments will not give everyone life. If I walked into a 5,000 person manufacturing company and they gave me the job as a CEO, that environment might not light me up to the same degree that I would if I was, working with 20 engineers on a tech product, right? Now, to each their own. There's no wrong way or right way. It's just me knowing who I am, knowing the style of operation I want to work in, and then understanding what stylistically is going to activate me.
Yeah, that's really important, right? Someone who is take a CTO of a 10-person development team versus someone who is managing a $500 million P&L as the CTO of a publicly traded company, likely very different personalities, very different skill sets, and in the inverse type roles may or may not pan out well, right? In
Yeah.
terms of understanding where that person actually wants to be and the work they want to go do.
Oh, they'll be
So
terrible. When I see startups with like 27 advisors that come and they're a bunch of old people and they come from all like I have my CTO is this, and I'll ask the startups, I'll say, does this person work for the company? They go, oh no, they will come on full time once the company is adequately capitalized. And I just look at a bunch of old people that have 20, 30 years stints. I'm just like, this is not going to work, right? The bunch of very seasoned, very intelligent people coming together rarely actually create anything great. It is generally people that are have a ton of energy. They're highly coachable. They're willing to put in the long hours. They have nothing to lose as a mindset. They don't know any better. The more that you know, the less likely you are to succeed in a startup.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we saw that too. Like my last stop in the corporate world, when you look at, like, I came from tech and I went to more of tech-enabled type company. And if you look at the average tenure across the executive team, there are people who were executives there longer than I was alive.
Yeah.
And what you saw in tech previously was people were, 18 to 36 month stints of sprints and they either burnt out or they crushed it and moved up.
Yeah.
And it was just a totally different environment based on who you were, what you wanted to go do. And the excitement was usually pretty tangible in those companies where it was quick in, quick out versus more of the stagnant type older company.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm 47 years old, and I'm different today than I was when I was 27 years old running a startup. And I do everything that I possibly can to activate my energy to be that startup person. I mean, I box, I do martial arts, I do vocal work, I practice the shofar, you see these sound bowls and all this sound equipment. I'm constantly trying to keep myself youthful and energized so that I can bring that type of startup energy or that energy to my startup. Um, but when you get seasoned and you're in the country club and you're going to the cigar lounge and you're having the 5 martini lunch and those types of individuals that have gotten to the top of corporate America, rarely are they able to do startups. I mean, you saw Meg Whitman burned $1 billion doing a startup. I forget the name of it with Katzenberg. She had $1 billion seed funded startup with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman and this massive team. And they burned through $1 billion in seed money, and they couldn't build it. Right now, you take a couple college kids, and they built YouTube. You know what I mean? Or Meg Whitman, the former CEO of HP and a brilliant executive, she didn't have what it took to build a startup.
Yeah, you just have a different type of mentality. Like you don't have that scrappiness. Like these
No.
young and like energetic startups, they have a level of scrappiness to them that other companies just don't have. Right? You
Yeah.
take that executive who's used to staying in five-star hotels when they travel, right? Flying private or flying business,
Yeah.
and it's just a whole different environment versus that, up and coming kid who is busting their butt to go really make a difference, and they have to
Yeah.
have that scrappiness to go figure it out. When you have the resources, at times you lose the creativity. And if like at the
Yeah.
executive level, once you have that meaningful exit, you may take a step back in some people in terms of the energy you have. Right. I know
Yeah.
even personally, like we're all guilty of it in certain ways where there's certain things, years ago that you would have said yes to, that you probably say no to now for the reason that, hey, that's not worth it, or there's an easier way, or just, don't have time
Yeah.
for it in a certain way. Um,
Yeah. Well, by the way, so I've recently was spending some time with a company that raised 500 million in capital and in startup capital, and spending money is really fun. There's nothing more fun than spending money. And when you're, the CEO or the CFO or the CTO or of a, $500 million company with $500 million in cash, you get to spend money all day long. You're meeting vendors, you're going out to lunch, you're hiring team members. It is all about spending money in those companies, right?
sure.
Saving money and being resourceful and pinching pennies and figuring out how to do things the most economic way is not fun. It's not nearly as fun as, green lighting a $5 million project here, or opening up a plant, or green lighting the purchase of a jet. That's fun. Culturally, people that love to spend money are not going to do well in a startup that is trying to be very, conservative in the way it's spending money and trying to figure out a way to build a business based on fundamentals that is economically viable. And I've even seen companies that have raised huge venture capital never be able to break from the spending money culture that comes with venture capital. And they actually will have down rounds or even go out of business because they don't figure out how to get into a culture where everyone is trying to do more with less. Everybody always is trying to do more with more in most of the cultures that corporate America is all about, as opposed to trying to be extremely resourceful, extremely conservative in how they spend money. And it's fun to spend money. And so when you have a culture that's all about spending money, and you have, you're running a huge company and you have a budget of 200 million a year, that's fun, right? That you get to do a lot of fun stuff. People love it when you spend money. You have a lot of friends when you're spending money. When you're trying to save money and cut costs and figure out how to do things economically, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, and I was a part of both on my end, right? Obviously, in not in kind of ownership or leadership type roles to that extent, but I was part of companies in which we were growing very aggressively. We were okay spending, way more than a dollar for a dollar of revenue,
Yeah,
right? Trying to startup, up rounds and valuations. And I was also part of a company in which they were purchased by private equity a few years back, and in a 5 to 7 year hold, where they were stripping every cost away to try and go maximize the EBITDA to go sell the company again. And the former is a lot more fun than the latter to be a part of.
Yeah, right. Oh, it is. One of my companies, in 2 years' time, I went from, um, near bankruptcy to 100 million in EBITDA, and it blew up in 2 years. I went from 9 million in sales to 635 million in sales and 100 million in EBITDA, and it was about 2 years' time. And everyone that came for that ride, they were just there for the spend. It was a rager. I mean, it was so much fun. I could hire the best talent. I was paying $1 million pay packages. I had my own jet. A lot of fun, right? Then I sold the company, and then pretty soon we had to, we had new owners, and they wanted cash out of the business, and it was no longer fun. And those people dropped off very quickly that were there for the ride. It's a rager when you have venture capital, and you have. In my case, I was able to crack a code with my customer acquisition and how I was building my company. So it wasn't private equity, but it was massive amounts of profit, and you're green lighting tons of projects, and it's so much fun. Every day you wake up and you just go spend money. That's all you're doing in those companies, basically. And the people that love doing that don't love saving money.
So when you were part of that, right, in terms of company growing really quickly, right, you're nailing customer acquisition, what worked really well in terms of bringing customers?
Well, we were the pioneers of this concept called challenge marketing. If you're familiar with social media challenges, we were the first to do that. We owned challenge.com. We had this challenge called the Body by Vi 90-day challenge. Um, and, and then we were the first to kind of monetize that on social media. And we had hundreds of thousands of people sharing their challenge results, their befores and afters. And we incented those people who shared, if they were able to refer 3 people to us, we would ship them their product for free. So we had a customer acquisition incentive built into every customer and built into our front end of our marketing. And it worked extremely well. And this was prior to anyone else doing challenges on social media. So we were the first to do it. It took off and it went viral in essence. So we cracked the marketing code, the customer acquisition code, and then we incented our customers to share. And that was the primary formula for success.
Yeah, and then the company gets acquired. I assume they start looking to go pay their investors distributions, and in turn, the budgets get cut. They want margins
Oh,
to
yeah.
go up, right? So, like, what happened next in terms of that process, and did you stay on
Well,
for part
yeah,
of it?
the people that bought us made some big mistakes. They were a publicly traded company, and they bought us on an earnout, and it was a 4-year earnout. But I had what was called a mulligan clause in it, which meant that I got to, like in golf, if you get to reshoot, I got to push back the purchase for 1 year based on certain environmental conditions occurring. And in the 2008 recession, those conditions occurred. It signed in 2008. 2009 was my mulligan year, and then 2010, I, with my co-founders and my team, was able to re-engineer the business to get it, accelerating. And by the time the earnout was up, they owed us more than the publicly traded company was worth. So they tried to force us into an IPO. We filed to go public on the NYSE. We did, got right to the day of the roadshow, and the acquisition price that the publicly traded company wanted to buy us for, or had to buy us for, was greater than what the markets would pay. So I canceled the roadshow and I forced them to conclude the buyout. They were really mad at me for doing that. So I sucked all the cash out of the publicly traded company's bank, and I killed their IPO on that day. And so from that point forward, they forced the company to dividend as all the cash in the bank. And they want to come in with a heavy hand and take over management of the company. And they should have never tried to force us to go public in the first place.
That was purely from the standpoint that they needed excess capital due to the earnout clause.
Yeah, they wanted the capital for the earnout clause. There was an IPO clause in the thing that they could force the IPO. They pushed us for the IPO. We grew from 9 million to 36 million to 231 to 635. So, the company had not built a foundation, and all of that cash that we wasted on going public and that whole thing should have been invested into innovation and foundation building in retrospect. And the acquiring company just, they didn't have that mindset.
So on your end now, like, what's next for you in terms of what you're working on, what you still get excited about, right? Kind of for you going forward, like, what are you prioritizing now in terms of what's next and kind of your focus as well?
Yeah, I've been building an AI product that I've coached a lot of entrepreneurs and I've mentored them, and I've trained in AI on 5 years worth of coaching entrepreneurs and mentoring entrepreneurs. And we've built it in such a way that where they implement it within their organizations, and it turns their personal and professional growth on autopilot for them and their team members. In essence, replacing me and the coaches that we have here at AlterCall with an AI powered platform. And it's just basically the MVP shipping literally today or tomorrow. We have it rolled out in beta in about 30 or so organizations, and several hundred team members utilizing it. And we have a couple PhD scientists, and we're studying how we can actually turn that growth personally and professionally on autopilot in the companies we serve. And so I want to deploy that to as many organizations as I possibly can. And I'm also looking at acquiring companies as well. So I'm reviewing financials, assessing financials, taking meetings, and having conversations around the subject of acquisition, whether I'm a participant in the acquisition or I help them get sold. I'm starting to do some, more investing and helping people with exits kind of work these days.
So what types of companies are you primarily looking at to go acquire?
It'd have to be, stylistically, it has to be a company that I really believe in, that I believe has the potential for resale sometime in the near future, or it could roll up, nicely with what I've already built. I've looked at a few different coaching companies. I've looked at those people that there's a number of use cases, for example, within our AI products, like in recruiting, and a variety of different use cases that I'm looking at. So if the use case will work with the existing platform that I built, I'll consider it. And if I believe that I can help really hit the gas on the company based on the knowledge that I have in building and scaling companies, oftentimes, I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, so I'm pretty gifted at that. I've helped companies exit. So if I look at the company and I realize this is something that I can lean into and drive incredible results quickly, then I'll get involved.
Yeah, I mean, for you, it makes a lot of sense, right? Either going to find companies that fit under the same umbrella, right, to go help the growth of what you're building as well, or companies in which you can go plug in your institutional knowledge, contacts, capital, the things you've already done, right, to help accelerate their growth as an unfair advantage. So it makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. When I work with an entrepreneur, oftentimes they'll bring to me a 50, $70 million company, and they don't know how to actually package it to be sold to private equity or to some other strategic buyer. They don't know how to raise short-term capital in order for them to position themselves in such a way, or get their financial house in order. So oftentimes they'll come to me and they'll say they're ready to exit and they want a partner in it that they trust, that's been there, that's done that. And then I'll work on some sort of an agreement where I can help them maximize the upside in the transaction.
Yeah, it's really smart. Well, Ryan, thanks again for diving deep into all this today in terms of working with entrepreneurs, buying and selling companies, scaling them up. Before we hop off here too, what advice do you have for the aspiring entrepreneur or the entrepreneur scaling a business and looking to exit the company? Like, what final advice do you have here?
Entrepreneurship is the most spiritual profession that you could possibly engage in. It's more spiritual than a rabbi or a pastor or anyone, and I'll tell you why. This is my thesis. Because as an entrepreneur, you are going to be tested, you're going to be challenged, you're going to be humiliated, you're going to be abandoned, you're going to be judged, you're going to be ridiculed, and that's going to happen on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. So I highly recommend embark on the spiritual journey of entrepreneurship and build your vehicle or your vessel as a way for you to evolve and mature spiritually. And if you do that, you'll have the best of both worlds. Your inner world will match your outer world, and you'll have a lot more joy and fulfillment in the process, because it really is a vehicle that will help you self-actualize in ways that nothing else will.
I like it. And if the listeners listening, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you or your team?
You can get a hold of me at Ryan Blair on Instagram. I'm active there. If you DM me, I'll dive in with you. And then our company is AlterCall.com, and that's AlterCall.com.
Cool. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure spending time with you and seeing you again.